What's up, guys? This is a special podcast episode with Kyle Headlee and our favorite pastor on campus, Pastor Steve Ryan. So we decided to come in today and just talk about some things. This little special podcast. Pastor Steve sent me another podcast to listen to, and it sparked our interest into having a conversation. So, Pastor, why don't you get us going?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Kyle. And I had started listening to a podcast by someone Kyle knows, Pastor Erwin McManus up in the Hollywood area, has Mosaic Church, does their own podcast, him and his son Aaron, and they were doing one on good versus evil that I started listening to and then sent to Kyle. So we just thought maybe it would be a good topic to talk about. Like, some things are obviously evil, but other things are kind of gray areas. So like for you, if you looked at something, what would you say? I can point at that and go, hey, that's evil, but sometimes it's gray.
Okay, so I know a big part of their conversation was just talking about the media we digest, movies, TV shows, music, etc. And they were talking about horror movies for a little bit. And the son, which I find ironic, was more of along the lines of like, oh man, that stuff's evil. But the dad, who's the head pastor, was more like, I don't know. Sometimes I like to watch those things. And so I don't like too much scary movies. I don't like to watch scary things. And for example, as a church or as a school, our chapel right now with our middle school and high schoolers, we're watching The Chosen. And there's a scene where I don't know if it's actually in the Bible or not, but basically a possessed person comes into their camp and kind of throws Mary Magdalene off because how she was delivered from that. And so he comes into their camp and he's like, I don't like the way you smell. And he's like acting possessed, you know, and he's like, and that made me feel uncomfortable. Now, this is a Christian production. It's a Christian show. It's based off of the disciples and all those things. And even watching someone portray what it would be like to be possessed by a demon made me feel very, very, I don't know.
Do you think it's because then you realize that the spiritual realm is real?
100%.
Yeah. You know, in Ephesians, and I know you know it well, chapter 6, it says we don't fight against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. And I think sometimes when you're trying to distinguish, have you opened a door to something?
Right.
Because I'm the same way. I don't like scary movies, but I was telling Suzanne one time, I said, it's weird. I look back and I watched The Exorcist when I was like 9 years old, and The Omen, and almost every scary movie you could think of, but I hated them.
The worst thing is in college, I know a lot of conservatives and Christians have a viewpoint of college, you know. A lot of Christians will tell you that they're trying to brainwash you and stuff like that. My experience hasn't been so much that. But I had to watch Rosemary's Baby, and I had never watched that before.
I've never seen that, by the way.
It's evil. I'll tell you that straight up. It's evil. Like, whoever created that movie, whoever acted in that movie, like there's some stuff there.
And she was having Satan's baby, right?
Yeah, so she got raped by Satan.
Oh, I didn't know that's what it was about.
So her husband wanted to be successful, so he sold his wife's body to Satan so that he could be a success, and then she got raped by Satan and gave birth to the Antichrist, which is the gist of the story. What's really weird, though, is it's not like that until about halfway through. Halfway through, it seems almost like a rom-com, and then just flips a switch.
Takes that weird turn.
Yep.
Which, don't you think, in essence, that's kind of the way darkness is? Like, one of the verses that I had written down before we come in here and it had come to mind was in 2 Corinthians 6:14 and 15. It says, the temple of the living God, or we're the temple of the living God. Don't team up with those who are unbelievers. How can righteousness be a partner with wickedness? How can light live with darkness? What harmony can there be between Christ and the devil? How can a believer be a partner with an unbeliever? I think the hard thing is now is you have so many believers that live like they're unbelievers.
I think our friend Rex Crane said it best. He's met a lot of Christians that didn't know Jesus, you know.
Man, that's good.
They act like they're Christians, but they partner themselves up with unbelievers a lot. And they didn't really understand Jesus's message, who didn't isolate from unbelievers. He engaged them, but he healed them. He walked with them. He restored them. He didn't walk their life. He made them walk his lifestyle. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. You know what it makes, when you always hear what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And I heard Pastor Jurgen say one time, what happens in Vegas stays in you.
Mm.
And I think a lot of times I think a lot of what's happening now with a lot of we label it woke stuff, but like the transgender and all that, after a while you become so infected by the culture that you don't realize that transgender is opposite of what the Bible says. God said he created them male and female. He didn't say along the way, hey, by the way, you can change your sex.
You could pick the one you want to be.
Yeah. And so why do you think after a while, because you're younger than me, why do you think more this generation has kind of taken that and went, oh, that's normal?
I think I definitely don't like to bash parents, but I think with my generation and even like my kids and stuff, there's a loosey-goosey of ethical standards. And I'm guilty of it. You know, we decide that travel ball is more important than church. Spending personal time as a family is more important than church. And those things are important.
And none of those things are bad, by the way.
They're not bad.
Yeah.
But when those things start to influence your ethical decisions and your relationships with God, when those things become more important than your relationship with Christ and the standard that Jesus has set for you to live, then they start to impact. It's like the sermon "Good Company, Bad Company"
that you just did
a couple weeks ago.
Yeah,
and I think it's on Spotify if you guys want to check it out. But
good sermon, by the way.
Definitely on YouTube.
Yeah,
you know, it's much easier for bad company to pull good company down than it is for good company to pull bad company up.
Which you did that illustration.
Yeah, with Isaac.
Yeah.
You know, who weighs 95 pounds soaking wet, and he was able to pull me off the stage, no problem. And I'm a strong guy, construction worker, former football player. You know, I couldn't pull him up to my level. And so when you surround yourself, you know, oh, it's okay to drink. You guys, I know you guys are Christians, but we're at the ballpark. You guys can have a drink. That's not necessarily bad. But what that slopes into the next decision and the next decision and the next decision is where you weigh off your ethics. So in regards to transgender, homosexuality, LGBTQ, stuff like that, and I'm not a professor, I'm not a philosopher. I went to school for creative writing. I think it is a misunderstanding of what sexual immorality means. And so they're not identifying it as a sin because it's become the cultural norm. Versus back in the day, whatever was taboo was sexual immorality was a sin because it was weird. It was different. Well, now it's normalized. It's everywhere you look. Boys with boys, girls with girls, thruples, which is 3 people in one relationship. I don't even know how that works. And different things like that. It's normal. So they're not convicting themselves. The Spirit will still try to convict them. But there's 2 parts to it. The Spirit has to convict you, and you have to convict yourself. You have to come to an understanding where you're messing up, you know, to get healing.
Yeah, Pastor Susan said something to me earlier today. It's like we flip it where the soul becomes more of the one that's leading your life instead of the spirit, or maybe even your flesh. And it makes me think that once you start going down that road that it doesn't really matter how I live or what I do, then that's when you start to develop your own truth. But in John 8:32, Jesus says, you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Well, we know in John 14:6, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life.
Yeah.
And I think what happens is eventually we push not only the scriptures aside, but Jesus, the author, the word. And we start to go, yeah, we love Jesus. We're Christian, but it's too judgmental to want to go according to his principles. Do you think, because I know you're a teacher at school and you do youth ministry, have you seen in this generation it's harder for them to grasp onto it, or do you see some kids that grasp onto what God has to offer?
I don't think it's hard for them. I just think it's how they were brought up. You know, are they willing to be open to that? Listen, Jesus said he came to fulfill the law. So he's not the judgmental, the hypocritical, the convictor, the evil guy who's going to tell you every single thing you're doing wrong. He said, love them how I've loved you, you know? And there were times where he was stern with people and stuff like that, but he was stern with love. And there's a difference between being just a jerk and saying, hey, everything you're doing is wrong and evil and messed up, and being loving and open and kind to people and allowing them to come to, listen, I don't have to prove Jesus to anyone. I couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus proves Jesus to people. Now he might use me in my actions and things that people see in me or hear from me, but I don't have the ability or the authority to create a case for Jesus.
Mm.
That's him. He's doing all that through me. You know, I can't go to people and just say, "Oh, you were that guy over here that did this and did that." That's if I did do that, that would be the Holy Spirit.
Mm.
That wouldn't be Kyle. You know, you don't want Kyle to give you a word.
Well, and don't you think too? I think the more that people see Christ in our lives, they're attracted to it. That's why people were attracted to Jesus Christ, is because he was real, he was authentic, and he understood how to lean into the power. I think too often we look at what people are doing on the outside, and instead of trying to deal with the issue, because the real issue, even if you have a gender issue and you're a boy and you think you're a girl or vice versa, that's really a deeper issue.
Mm-hmm.
That's someone that's been wounded or whatever it may be. So they're actually trying to get away from themselves, but at the same time, worshiping what should never have been worshiped, which is self or your body. You can cut body parts off, but you're still going to deal with your emotions and the things that are damaged. And until you allow Jesus Christ to come into your life and really heal it, I think it's hard to determine what is good and what is evil,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't have that barometer, or you're not leaning into it with the Holy Spirit.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of evil stuff that doesn't sound bad. You know, like let's just take music, for example. Sam Smith, he makes great music.
But I used to love his music, by the way.
Yeah, he makes great love ballads and good songs and everything, but completely living in a demonic style of life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so if you were just to show, maybe not that one song he did about hell, or I forget
Yeah,
what that song.
I know what you're saying.
But if you're just to show some random Joe Smo one of his love songs and say, hey, listen to this, they wouldn't think anything bad of it. They would just be like, oh, this is a love song to, you know, to his spouse, not knowing that he lived in a homosexual lifestyle, you know?
Yeah, I think one of the first songs I ever heard by him was one of his early songs, and he'd wear like a suit and, you know, be dressed up and sing, and good looking guy and everything. I don't even think I realized he was gay at the time. And I think what even happens with that, because we're in a culture now that when I grew up, because I was born in 1964, when I grew up, if you ran across someone that was gay or lesbian, you ran across more people that were gay, and they used the word queer back then. But if you ran across that, it was almost like, dang, I can't believe there's someone actually in the gay lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
But then after a while, that become acceptable, that we looked at someone, we're always going to love them. But after a while, if you go, you know what, it's okay to be gay or lesbian, and then you completely remove the Bible. If everyone was gay or lesbian, you could never have kids.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like if you just take common sense and go, but at some point in our society, we went, oh, yeah, God may have created them male and female, and he says a man shall leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife. But then all of a sudden, you know what, if a guy wants to be with a guy and a girl wants to be with a girl, and then I think that what it does is it takes you down that road that eventually, if your adults are mutilating kids' body parts and saying, we'll deal with your real issue by cutting off body parts,
Yeah.
that's the slippery slope of where it goes.
Man, if my parents would have jumped the gun when my older sister thought it was funny to put makeup on me and have me do a dance with her to an NSYNC song in the living room and jump to the gun, who knows where I would have been today. Because that actually happened. I don't know. I was like 4 or 5 years old. My older sister put makeup on me and was like, "Let's."
Which
go
you thought was probably funny.
I thought it was funny. We were
Yeah.
we were dancing to NSYNC. I didn't think nothing of it. But if my parents would have looked at that and been like, "Oh, he likes to dance in makeup. He's a female." Like, who knows? You know.
And don't you think a lot of times, because you have just had another baby, but you guys have 2 kids. How is Kenai and Kalea?
Kalea's going to turn 13, and Kenai is going to be turning 9 soon.
So, you know, in raising your kids, they go through awkward things growing up.
Mm-hmm.
If one of my 2 daughters decided to play with a Tonka truck when they didn't do that, but let's just say where they were 3 or 4, more leaned to the things that would be considered boyish or male, I'm not going to feed that and go, you know what? Maybe you are a boy.
Right.
I'm going to reinforce, I think, number one
and we need more females on job sites they're smarter. They don't do as much stupid stuff.
Yeah.
I've been encouraging a lot of my students to look into becoming an engineer, working for Caltrans, becoming a state inspector, because just if you're a female and you do that kind of stuff, you get more money, more sign-on bonuses, different scholarships, and so that's a good thing. If you
Yeah.
have if you have an 8-year-old little girl who wants to play with Tonka trucks and move dirt around, encourage her to do that.
She may own her own trucking company someday.
She may be an operator.
Yeah.
Who knows? You know.
But don't you think what I've found as a father is if I show my daughters love and show them how much I love them no matter what they're going through and embrace that, they're not even going to think about changing genders and doing all that. And even if the question ever come up, you talk about it. Like I talk to my daughters about all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So don't you think being a strong father?
I agree, 100%. I listen. We have what we call the truth time in our family, and when you call truth time, whatever you say after that, you can't be punished. For. Obviously, there's real life punishment.
Good.
There's real life things that happen, but if you come to me and say, "Dad, truth time," I'm not going to punish you for whatever comes out because it's telling me that you need to talk to me and that the conversation of what's going to happen is more important than anything else. And what I think as a father is showing maturity, because you're almost punishing yourself. Like you have to break down your pride and come and talk to your dad about whatever it is that's going on. You know, but earlier you were talking about like the lines of good and evil gets blended when we get that attitude of I could do whatever I want. That's my biggest problem with the grace message. And I love the grace message. I love God's mercy and grace on us, on our life. But I don't teach that in youth group, because the last thing I need is these kids going, oh, well, Kyle says God's already forgiven me for everything I've done, so I might as well just go have sex and smoke weed and party and do whatever. Because, yeah, Jesus has forgiven you and God's forgiven you and you'll still get into heaven, but there's still real-world consequences to your decisions. And if you want to drink and drive, if you want to smoke weed instead of going to school, you're going to end up down a road that you don't want to go down. And so it's not that I don't teach grace. I just don't teach my youth group that no matter what, doesn't matter, do what you want. You're still a Christian. God still loves you. You're okay. Because it's a concept that they can't. I mean, even a lot of adults struggle with it. They think they'll use it to justify their actions.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking, there's one part in the Bible where Jesus heals someone and he says to them, go and sin no more unless something worse comes upon you. And he's saying to them, if you go back to the same patterns of sin, it's going to be worse than before. He never said he didn't love them. He just said, if you choose to go this way. And I think like when my kids were little, and I actually got this from, of all people, Donald Trump. I heard him say this years, even before he was president. But Trump would say to his kids when he was little, he would have them repeat after him, I'm not going to smoke, I'm not going to drink, and I'm not going to do drugs. So I would do this with my two daughters, and I just added to it, also, I won't have sex before marriage. So even like when they were 5 and 6 years old, we would do it, and they would laugh, and I would laugh and everything. But I did it with them for a long time. Yeah. And I wanted to ingrain in them that you don't have to do these things. Like I did all those things. I drank, I abused alcohol, abused drugs. I had sex before marriage. As you know, I was married before, but before we got married, me and my first wife, we lived together. She got pregnant, took her down to get an abortion. So it was like one sin led to another sin, led to another sin. Did God love me? Yes. Did I have major consequences to that? Yes. Yeah. And even though that abortion was back in 1989, I remember it like it was yesterday. I know God's forgiven me and he's forgiven my ex-wife. But at the same time, we've lived with those consequences, and a child was murdered in so I think the hard part is telling truth and trying to distinguish when you're telling truth between good and evil and still loving the person. Like, how have you, when you've dealt with situations maybe recently of someone you see struggling in sin, but they don't want to receive maybe truth you wanted to tell them?
I mean, I think a lot of the times, at least the people I deal with, they know what they're doing is wrong. And so like with kids, it's easy because you don't even have to know what's going on in their life. They know what's going on in their life. And so if you could get the idea of saying like, hey, you know, you're doing some things you probably shouldn't be doing, or you're doing some things that you're not proud of. I don't have to go down and list every single sin, and I have pretty good discernment, I would say. Like I can look at a lot of my youth and my students and know which ones are having premarital relations, which ones are dabbling in vaping and and doing drugs and alcohol, and so I feel like I have pretty good discernment. And a lot of time I'm just like, hey man, you know, you want better for yourself, and they almost convict themselves in that way. The biggest thing, the hardest thing, is encouraging them to stay on. And what I mean by that is, like, I'll have one kid who wants to change and do better and walk that, but they won't change their company, and the people that they surround them by will laugh. Ha ha! Look at you! You're trying not to cuss anymore, or why don't you want to hit the bull, or why don't you want to go here and go make out with these people? Like, and eventually they'll fall back into that because they don't stay on. They don't realize that maybe those people aren't bad. Maybe they're not bad people, but what they're into is not good for you.
Well, it's funny because your sermon from 2 weeks ago, or was it 2 weeks ago tonight, or 3 weeks now?
3 weeks ago now.
Yeah, on bad company, because I know you took it from Corinthians, and it says bad company corrupts good habits. Mm-hmm. And it's me and Suzanne were watching this show on Peacock the other night. It's a series called The Tattooists of Auschwitz. And it's really good. And unfortunately, by the third episode, they had to throw in a gay relationship. I don't know what that had to do with anything. But besides that, one of the guy that become a tattooist was a Jew. And there's a scene where they're taking these women prisoners outside, but he doesn't realize what it's for at first. But he wants to get medicine for a girl that he likes that's in the camp as well. So he starts carrying this lady out and realizes when he gets outside, there's about 7 or 8 other women stripped down all their clothes, and they're taking them out to freeze them to death. And you see that look on his face like, oh my goodness, I've so compromised to get one thing at the destruction of something else. And I think that's the thing. What is it profit? It says in the Bible, it says, what's the profit of man? But let's just say a man or woman or anyone else, if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul.
Yeah.
And I think that's the tough part. You know, as Christians, are we saved? Does God love us? Are we going to heaven? Yes. But if we live like hell here on earth, are we really spreading the gospel? You know?
Well, and that's what it comes down to, like discernment, because I bet you know, how many is it? It's like 2 billion Jewish people were murdered during the Holocaust. I bet you there's a good amount of people that didn't think Hitler was evil.
Oh, it's funny that you say that. I wrote this down before we come in. If you look at someone like Hitler in retrospect, we know it's evil. Yet at the time his movement was gaining momentum, did anyone care?
Yeah, 100%. Because that's the point. Is like, you have to use discernment in those situations, because things that are evil don't always look evil. And like you said, hindsight in 2020, we all look at it and be like, man, Hitler was a bad dude. But there was obviously enough people who believed that he was righteous, or was on a call or a path, or there was something about him that they believed in, that they would follow him to the ends of the earth. Same thing with Gandhi and Muhammad and Buddha and all these people. There was something about them that was drawing people that doesn't necessarily reflect as evil, although we know what they were into was evil. And so that's really why you have to use discernment in your life. Like, I'm the worst at music. I love Air One, which is the local radio station, if you guys don't know that. I can't stand when they do you can fund Air One if you call in now and do all that. So I'll change the station. And a lot of times I'll go to like 95.1, which is country music, or 96.7, which is classic rock. And I'm just listening to Beastie Boys or some Blink-182. And it's fun. It's good music. It's happy. It makes me think of my childhood, riding my skateboard around with my friends and stuff. But what's
like the memories?
But what's the message in it?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And another verses, or 2 verses I wrote down, is Matthew 6:22 and 23. It says, your eye is like a lamp that provides light for your body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. But when your eye is unhealthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. And if the light you think you have is actually darkness, how deep is that darkness? It's kind of like what you were just saying. You can be listening to one type of music, and then because I like a lot of 80s rock and roll, but a lot of that music's about sex, drugs, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the whole adage, sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Yeah, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And after a while, you find yourself almost like, yeah, like just almost like mimicking that. Even if you're not playing it out, you're playing it out in your soul and in your heart and stuff. And I think is the fine line again. Like you like Harry Potter and movies like that, probably Lord of the Rings. I don't quite get them. I know it's good against bad. And I don't even think it's even bad watching those movies. But for someone like you, because you've even written fantasy books, that's not really an issue for you.
Right.
So to me, I think when you take things like that, if you get too legalistic, then no kid's ever going to read a book because we're going to want them to read all nonfiction and boring books.
Yeah, just read the Bible.
Yeah, exactly.
And
I love the Bible.
Not that the Bible's boring, but an 8-year-old doesn't want to read the Bible.
No.
And I bug Christians all the time. They get mad at me, but I tell them the only difference between the Chronicles of Narnia and Harry Potter is the author.
Mm-hmm.
And you're fine with the Chronicles of Narnia just because you know who the author is and what he stands for. But the author of Harry Potter, she's kind of here and there. Sometimes she's transgender rights, sometimes she's not. Like seems like she's on.
That's J.K.
Rowling.
Yeah,
And she has like she said something about Trump a couple of years ago. Like she's still trying to find her way. And the only reason why you're fine with Chronicles of Narnia isn't the content. It's because of who the author was that you support it.
If C.S. Lewis wrote it, it's different than J.K. Rowling,
right?
Even though
it's
really? Still about good and evil.
There's still witches. There's still spells. There's still all kinds.
And Lord
of
the
stuff.
Rings is all about that too, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
a lot
the same
of
thing. We're fine with that because Tolkien was a Catholic.
Well, I know we talked about from that podcast with Erwin and Aaron McManus, where Erwin McManus makes the point that if you watch Star Wars, you realize there's good and evil. There's Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times, if Christians start talking about good and evil, the world will go, you're judgmental.
Right.
But now you even have Christians going against other Christians and going, you're using the Bible as a weapon. And I'm like, no. All I'm saying is if the Bible says not to lie, don't lie.
Yeah.
It's, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's things like that. But I think when you get into these other things, like if you like watching fantasy movies, so be it. I like to watch sports. Some people probably think that is idol worship.
There's some people that sports is a religion.
Yes.
It's true.
Yeah.
And I love sports. You know, I've had to take a step back from sports. And I'm still into sports. But man, 4 or 5 years ago, it was fantasy football, fantasy baseball, watching Sports Center 8 hours a day, just listening to ESPN Los Angeles. And
I've been there too.
It was a different world. I was trying to come up on the sports writers journalism scene, and I was doing high school and college reporting and stuff like that. So I kind of had to be a little bit in the known of what was going on. But I can also use that as an excuse of, I can't go to church. I have to watch all these football games and stuff like that. One thing I wanted to bring up before we close out, and it's funny because you talked about this isn't like, well, you said this about me, I'm going to say this about you. You talked about Harry Potter, but let's talk about the John Wick. I love John Wick.
I love John Wick.
You love John Wick.
Yeah.
And there's some things in those shows that I'm like,
John is most violent, kills everybody.
Yeah.
And
I think the second one with like the Russian lady who sacrificed her blood for
in the bathroom.
What the heck was that?
I know. And some people would be like, that's too sensual.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's that's the whole thing is that now if I knew that there was someone that would go to a movie like that with me and it become a stumbling block for them, I wouldn't go to that movie with them.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I like John Wick movies and that kind of stuff. And I remember even the reason we ended up watching John Wick, the first one, was me and Suzanne one night. She goes, man, we had flipped on it. And it was on HBO and we didn't have HBO, but it was like a free weekend. And I said, maybe we ought to just TiVo this movie. And she goes, what's it about? So I put the info on it and it says John Wick is an assassin that kills like 180 people in 90 minutes. And she goes, let's watch it. I'm kind of in an angry mood right now. So
she was living, vicariously through John.
Yes, exactly. And my kids, in fact, me and Cheyenne the other night was watching a little bit of John Wick 2 and I think part of 3. and they've seen all of them too. And they're just like, man, Dad, you with John Wick. But if I knew that was going to be a stumbling block for someone, especially if I'm inviting them in to my life, then I know I have to be careful.
You would use the wisdom and the discernment about it.
Yeah.
If there's somebody who I've never dabbled in witchcraft or anything like that, but if there was somebody who came in my life who did do those things, I probably wouldn't talk to them about Harry Potter or my fantasy books or anything like that.
Well, or if you were someone that could have a beer or two, but you knew the person that you're around was a former addict, then as a Christian, you would go, I know I can have a beer or two, but for them, it could open a door for them.
Right.
And I think that's the fine line, is that also I have to know if I'm watching something, like we turned on the Tom Brady roast the other night. We didn't get 30 seconds into it, and I said, I can't listen to this garbage.
Yeah, I kind of assumed. I didn't turn it on because I kind of knew where it was going to go.
Yeah, and I had seen some clips pop up on TikTok, different comedians, and it was pretty good. And then when we turned it on, I was like, oh my God, it's just so graphic and sexual. And I was like, I don't want to listen to this. So we immediately turned it off, where someone else may be able to watch it, it doesn't bother them. But for me, I could feel it polluting me. I don't know why John Wick killing 150 people doesn't. Maybe it is polluting me, but I don't know.
So I have one fun theology question for you.
Sure.
One of the kids asked me yesterday. We were watching The Chosen, and we know Jesus didn't sin. Otherwise, none of this could be possible. So, is breaking the law sinning? Because Jesus healed on the Sabbath, and that's the episode that we watched, where now the Pharisees were going after him for breaking the law for healing a man on the Sabbath. So, is that sinning for us to run a red light, or is it not?
So, this is my understanding. We know God had the 10 Commandments, and that was the law that he had given. But then the Jewish people added their own man-made laws, with 613. That's why a Jewish person would wear a tallit, and at the bottom it has the little, how it's tied together, almost like knots. Each one of those represented a law. So if you remember, Jesus healed on the Sabbath, and they got mad at him and said, what are you doing healing on the Sabbath? Well, because it wasn't against God's law to heal on the Sabbath. It was against their man-made laws.
Right.
So I think Jesus throws in a story where he goes, but if one of your donkeys falls in a well, I think that's what he says.
Or your son. If your son or your donkey fall in a well.
Would you not rescue him on the Sabbath, or the animal or your child? So what it was is they had made so many of their man-made laws, but Jesus was obviously wise, and he realized the hypocrisy of them. And so I think that would be my answer to that. So if you ran a red light, I would say, are you a bad driver? You know what I mean? Like, you're not really sinning. You're just maybe a lack of judgment at the time. I think, there's the thoughts that you either fall into sin or you choose to sin.
Yeah.
So let's just say you're driving and you get distracted, and all of a sudden you run a red light. You probably weren't choosing to sin at that moment, but sin means missing the mark. So you're missing the best of what you could have done, but you didn't choose to do it. You kind of fell in. Yeah. I hope that makes sense.
No, it makes sense.
Yeah. So, I think that's the thing. I mean, I've had times in my Christian life that I've chosen to sin.
Right.
And it never worked out.
There's definitely times where you're pulling up and the yellow has been hanging around for a little while, and then you decide to smash that accelerator, and you ran a red.
And you get through, and it's like even red in the middle of it. Have you ever went through one and you're like, God, I hope no one's seen it? And you're like, God's seen that.
I did the worst thing. One time, I might have done this more than once. I don't know. But I was dazed past the light that I was at, and I was looking at the next light, and that light went green, and I just booked it, right? And I realized nobody else went with me, and I was like looking, and I looked in my rearview mirror, and it was still red. Thank God I didn't get hit or hit anyone. But yeah, like
I've done all this. But I think it goes back to, once again, going back to the original topic, and I know we're ending here, but with good or evil, is your intention to try to me as a Christian, if I'm trying to trick people and go, this isn't really evil, but what I should follow up with is it's just what I want to do. So when I had sex with my first wife before marriage, it's what I was choosing to do. And no matter, and I remember I had some good Christian friends tell me when we moved in together, this one friend in particular, he said, Steve, you're playing with fire and you're going to get burned. 100% spot on. And I was like, and I remember saying to him, Kyle, I said, I don't know. We're in love.
Yeah, that's the number one excuse. Oh, we're in love.
I was in lust. Yeah. And I don't blame her either. That was a choice.
Well, how old were you guys? 23?
I was 25 and she was 21.
You hardly know anything at that age.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Like it doesn't.
Yeah. And if at 59 years old, I would never choose to do it. But still, even at 59, I still have choices every day to make. Is it going to glorify Jesus Christ or is it going to worship self?
Mm-hmm.
And if I ever go towards self or lean into self, it's always destructive.
Yeah, it's always the bad call.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for joining us for this special podcast. We're going to call it Good versus Evil with Pastor Steve. If you guys have any questions, comments, or like to reach out, feel free to email us or comment on one of our Facebook pages or call the office and tell Pastor Steve what you think. He loves to talk. So we'll talk to you guys later and have a good one. We love you, DP City.